Hi everyone. Game 8 from the 1986 World Chess Championship between champion Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov. Now, the last game we looked at was Game 5, which was decisive. Karpov had stunned Kasparov with a brilliant victory right after he was defeated in Game 4. So at this point, the each player had won one game apiece, and game 6 and 7 were drawn. And so now we are here at game 8. Kasparov with the white pieces again, and Anatoly Karpov with the black pieces. Now, game started off d4, d5. Sorry about that. The Dutch. d4, d5, c4, e6. Now this is a little change for Karpov. In the game 5 that he lost, he opened up this Nimzo Indian and was defeated. So perhaps his team was working on some improvements. Meanwhile, he brings out the old tried and tested Queen's Gambit declined. Good variation for those who don't like playing into the exchange variation proper. After, say, knight f6, c takes, and bishop g5. Some players want to avoid that scenario and they play bishop e7. So now, if white wants to play the exchange variation, he must play it with his bishop on f4. And this is what happened during the game. And now, knight f6. So in this variation, we can see there's not as much pressure on d5 as would be if the bishop were here pressuring f6. e3 and castle. Simple development by Kasparov, bishop d3, and now c5. Okay. Now, here are Kasparov's notes right here on this particular, or comments rather, after this move c5 by Karpov, which he gives an exclamation mark. Behind these two outwardly unremarkable moves are concealed counteractions against the two players' plans. So he's talking about bishop d3 and c5 respectively. White has not allowed the black bishop to come out to f5. Okay? But has weakened his control over d4. How has he done that? By putting this bishop here. If this bishop was here, then the queen would have more influence here. Okay? So he's weakened his control over d4, which the opponent promptly exploits by initiating play in the center, and that's where you get the c5 from. Okay. Now back to the game. Knight f3. And Kasparov mentions that flexibility is important. It says that after d takes c5, bishop takes c5, white is unable to prevent the simplifying break in the center. And he gives, for example, knight f3, knight c6, castle and d4, knight a4, bishop d6, takes, knight d4, knight takes, e takes, and bishop g4. And black has no problems at all. So this is why he plays knight f3 instead. Now knight c6 and castle. And now bishop g4. Okay, now with black putting all this pressure, who's Karpov in this instance, right? on d4 indirectly, he's forcing forcing white to exchange on c5 because it's becoming impossible to maintain the d4 pawn. Okay, so in one sense, black is solving his opening problems, but then in another, he's going to have something else to deal with. So now he has this isolated pawn here. Now h3. The old asking the bishop the question, what are you going to do? Karpov gives up the bishop. And now d4. Okay. And this is what black is relying on. Of course, he doesn't want to keep the isolated pawn, but his position has been freed. His piece is beautiful, and he makes the thematic advance. Okay. Now, of course, normally black should be okay here, but chess is a concrete game, and we'll see that it's not as easy as it looks. Okay. Now, 94 by Kasparov. And now bishop e7 is played. Now, this is the most natural looking move. Knight takes e4. Of course, if queen takes, then just simply g6, defending the mate threat. So that's not critical. But bishop takes e4. And now d takes e3. Maybe queen h5 here. But then that could be met by e takes f2. So this probably would have been a little better for Karpov just to take. Instead, after knight e4, he went back, played bishop e7. Okay. Rook a d1. And now queen a5 from Karpov. Okay. And this attack on the queen side, it's basically the foundation for Karpov's counterplay. Okay, knight g3. D takes. Now f takes e3 and queen takes a2 from Karpov. Okay, Kasparov says a highly practical decision. It is not even a question of the a2 pawn, but that black chooses the shortest path to e6, where the queen will cement together his defenses and keep control of the important strategic point, e5. Note that all the same, black could not have prevented the invasion of the knight at f5, right, because of g, right? In other words, his idea is saying instead of taking the pawn, say he just went g6 and just bishop h6, rook f e8, and knight f5 anyway, with the strong attack. So Karpov snatched the pawn, queen takes a2, and knight f5, queen e6, bishop h6, by Kasparov. Yeah, what a move. 98, defending. Queen h5. Kasparov was truly something with with the chess pieces. He just keeps putting the pressure on g6. Queen to g4. 95. Karpov fighting back. Queen g3. And now bishop f6 from Karpov. And bishop b5. Now here, Perhaps just simply take right here. But Kasparov says that after bishop takes f8, king takes f8, and knight d4, and queen e7, that black would have had sufficient compensation for the exchange. What is this compensation? That black has control over a complex of dark squares, centralized pieces, and weak white pawns at e3 and b2. And he says, Kasparov that is, on looking deeper into the position, I realized that I had incorrectly assessed my possibilities on the previous move when I assumed that the opposite color bishops would help the attack. In fact, the black bishop is too strong. The battle is now approaching its culmination and demands unusual decisions by both players, and therefore I placed my choice on the bishop move, which sharply inflames an already intense situation. Also, of no small importance was the fact that by this point both players, especially Karpov, were seriously short of time. I realized that such tactics were risky, but I felt intuitively that the activity of White's pieces would guarantee him against any troubles. The initiative at all cost. This is the keynote of White's subsequent play. Black meritoriously accepts the challenge, skillfully discharging the atmosphere on the king side. So back to the game. Bishop b5. Knight g7. Bishop takes g7. Bishop takes g7. And now rook d6. Attacking the queen. Brilliant move by Karpov, queen b3. This is bad for black, of course. G takes, rook takes. It's bad for black. So rook d6 happened, queen b3. Knight takes g7, and now queen takes b5. Okay, and now it seems that the attack is being neutralized by Karpov. He's defending very well, trading off pieces. And at this point, Kasparov thinks that Karpov decided to play for a win as opposed to a draw here. He has an extra pawn, as you can see here on the queen side. It's 2-1 majority. Both the B and E pawns are weak, and it seems like black's attack is over. Alright, so here's what Kasparov says. I think it was here that Karpov decided to play for a win. His extra pawn in solid position may have seemed sufficient grounds for optimism, but the point is that in his attacking surge, White has not overstepped the boundary of acceptable risk, and as before, the position is in a state of dynamic equilibrium. It should be mentioned that in my games with Karpov, such situations, a complicated double-edged struggle, mutual time trouble, have arisen quite often. And each time I have been left with the feeling that after a successfully conducted defense, he has been very resolutely inclined, and has aimed to seize the initiative and to tip the scales in his favor. Over the next 2 to 3 moves, the ex-world champion could have obliged me to force a draw, but he deliberately avoided doing so, reckoning that White's attacking potential was insufficiently great, and that sooner or later black's material advantage would decide the outcome. Nevertheless, the complexity of the subsequent problems proved too much for him. Yes, this was no longer autumn 1984, but the summer of 1986. Knight f5 by Kasparov. Rook a d8. Rook f6. Rook d2. Okay, so now Karpov is trying to mount a counterattack and trying to play for a win. but is in severe time trouble. Queen G5 by Kasparov. And now Queen takes B2. And here's what Kasparov has to say. Here it is. Speaking of the move, Queen takes B2. Black's decisive and essentially only mistake in the game. At the most inappropriate moment, he decides to, quote, unquote, treat himself to a second pawn. The apparent absence of real threats and the fever of time trouble evidently dulled Karpov's vigilance. Said a draw was still a reality, but for this it was essential to play King H8. So instead of snatching that pawn, King H8. And then Kasparov gives Queen H6, Rook G8, Knight E7, and now he gives Queen takes B2 here. Queen G5 and Rook G7. Okay, and he gives a long line that I'm not going to get into because I'm sure there's a lot of errors in there. But he thinks it leads to a draw. I believe that white is a little bit worse there, but black just has to definitely watch his step. I mean, it's a tactical minefield, but I don't think it's just a draw. But back to the game. So Queen takes B2 was played, and now King H1 is played by Kasparov. And now he plays the move King H8. And this move right here is really the decisive mistake. This is where things go downhill. Here, black can still draw here. Okay, so for instance, with the move like Queen C3, staying on this diagonal is important. And then if Queen H6, then of course G takes F5. Knight E7, King H8. Actually, Queen H6. Nope, Karpov's in trouble there also. So I stand corrected on that. After Queen G5, it's hard not using the engine to see Queen G5. Queen takes B2. King H1. What about B6? Just trying to do a random move. B6. I don't know. Black is in some serious trouble here. Yeah, you guys will have to analyze that at home. I think black is busted here though. Have to study this a little more detail. Might have to turn the engine on. See if black has a defense here. But okay, moving on. King H8 was played, and this is definitely like a head scratcher right here. After this, Knight D4 happens, and again, it's cutting everything off from the king off from the protection. Rook takes D4. And now Queen takes E5. So you can see the problem, how once the king is cut off from on this diagonal by its own piece, then only white has access on the diagonal. After Queen takes E5, Karpov's flag actually fell. So he lost on time in a worse position after 31 moves. So Kasparov took some great chances in that game. I mean, he probably, and today's chess with like all the engine preparation and stuff like that, he definitely would have lost that game. But back then, you could play, as Kramnik said, like on the edge of a bluff and defeat opponents. And Kasparov defeated many opponents like that. Just playing in this and so did Tao, in this like style of moves that might be not, not quite the best, but the position is so complicated that the opponent, could go astray. So interesting game, and this game was definitely a turning point in the match. Um, both players had each scored victories, but this game was important in psychologically because Karpov had neutralized Kasparov, um, early in the game, and actually was on the road to basically becoming better, seeking an advantage. He basically did what he wanted to do. He snatched the pawn early, and then he defended very well, trading off pieces. Occupying the second rank, and I mean he's pretty close to consolidating. And then all of a sudden, it's like the wheels just came off, and next thing you know, that's it. Just losing 31 moves. And so this definitely had an effect, um, for the rest of the match. Let me just share with you in closing, Kasparov's, Kasparov's comments. So he says, let's see. Yes, Karpov played for a win. He desperately sought victory, although to be fair, it should be mentioned that this was not for long. Over the course of 3 moves from 26 to 28. Unfortunately for him, he was not in fact able to assess precisely the positions which arose, and was chasing a mirage. Then he says, and for what should I be reproached? For the fact that by 21 Queen G3 and 22 Bishop B5, I sharpened to the utmost an already complicated struggle, or for the fact that by the unexpected Rook F6, 27 Rook F6, I avoided a draw, hoping nevertheless to change the character of the struggle to my advantage. The intensity of the eighth game, its at times unexpected clashes and upheavals, the broad arsenal of means employed by both players, the fierce character of the struggle. Is not all this the essence of genuine chess creativity, that we value in it, and that for which we love it? You will soon be meeting game 11. The labels that were pinned on it, the enthusiastic descriptions it received. It is difficult to overestimate the psychological significance of Game 8 for the entire subsequent struggle in the match. The defeat in it was such a severe blow to Karpov that even after he had taken a postponement before Game 9, he was unable to motivate himself for a full-blooded struggle.